Well, greetings and welcome along to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. Today, coming to you from lockdown here in New Zealand. Henry Burrell, welcome. Great to have you back on the show. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, Paul. Yeah, good. Thanks. Just discussing the glamour of my non-glamorous background. So locked up in Mount Roskill, but yeah, can't complain. All going well. Thanks. How are you?
Excellent. We'll probably find we're only a stone's throw from each other because I'm in a similar area.
Oh, cool.
Maybe you can give listeners a little bit of an intro of where you fit into this big wide world of tech and journalism here in New Zealand.
Yeah, sure. So hi everyone. I'm the tech editor at BusinessDesk, where, if you haven't heard of us, we're an online news website, obviously, like we all are. And we concentrate, as the name would suggest, on business news. And so I report on technology in New Zealand, whether that's the startups, the incumbents, the actual tech we use every day, and just trying to keep a hold, really, of a very innovative sector, which keeps me very busy.
Excellent. I really appreciate that Business Desk has taken that extra focus on technology since you've come on board, and there's been some really good content from in the last few days. I've a bunch of articles of interest. Peter Griffin's been writing on there, so we're going to delve into some of these I think really timely topics that are important to New Zealand. Some changes that is happening in terms of our broadband here in New Zealand, which is coming from Chorus. We've got that competition going on with our mobile carriers who are sort of trying to compete with the fibre, and of course we've got Starlink from SpaceX coming into the mix as well to stir things up. A little bit of discussion around contact tracing. Some changes in the area of Wi-Fi calling, which I'm sure some will appreciate. New technology coming in to solve some of the MIQ, managed isolation issues. Something new from Segway, which looks rather interesting, and then a big shake-up, possibly coming through when it comes to the way we purchase our mobile apps. And a few other topics in there as well, in terms of new things from the likes of Apple that are rumored, and new things that are actually here from Samsung here this month. So we'll jump straight in. So first up, Chorus had announced these new sort of, I guess you call them base plans for our fibre connectivity or ultra fast broadband here in New Zealand. And when the ultra fast broadband was launched, the base speed, off the top of my head, I'm not even sure if I can believe that it was true. I think was a speed of 30 megabits download and 10 megabits per second upload, and things have really come a long way. So in recent times, that for the last few years, it's been 100/20 as the minimum connection speed for fibre. And Chorus have announced that they are going to bump that along a bit further to 300 megabits per second as the base speed, which is a nice 3 times increase. But I think possibly more exciting as the upload speeds are going up by 5 times to 100 megabits per second. And for I guess a lot of folks who maybe have been constrained in terms of what they're able to spend on their connection, that's going to make a very nice difference to them. Possibly there's a side effect. I don't know whether you think this would be true if someone's signing up for a new connection that maybe has gone for a gigabit in the past and just because they could and it was really cool and fast. Do you think some of those people might say, well, a move to a 300/100 actually for most people is going to be quite adequate and unlikely to be maxed out?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the first thing to remember, I think when we talk about it, we often get stuck in the weeds with the numbers and everything. And a lot of people, me included, to be honest, consumers, we don't really know what these numbers actually mean. It's really hard to quantify them. So when Chorus says, there's got so many moving parts to this story. When Chorus says it's going to triple speeds for upload and download, as he said, but at no extra cost. It's at no extra cost to the retail partners. So it won't charge
at a wholesale
them
level, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's no actual guarantee here, even though Chorus would have the public believe, oh great, we're tripling things for free, and they may well, for some retail partners, you might not actually see that cost down the end. But there's actually no guarantee that the consumer won't pay more. But I'm not here to be completely pessimistic about it all. 3 times speed is great. And it will apparently be ready by December. So we might find, depending on your broadband retailer and if you're part of the Chorus network, which is about over 75% of the UFB network, you might see a little Christmas present from your provider saying you've got 3 times faster speed now, and that would be great for for PR. I think what will be interesting is whether people will pay more for gigabit now. Gigabit is great, but it depends what you're doing, and internet isn't all about speed either. It's also, as you well know, Paul, latency, congestion, and when we're all at home as well. If everyone's in their offices, or if they're lucky enough like us to be able to work from home, then the network can suffer sometimes. And I think Chorus said in that release that the average household on the network is using about 500 gigabytes of data a month now, and that's quite a lot.
And as you say, there are lots of moving parts. Latency, is part of it, which is sort of the delay when you communicate, and that impacts people most if they're doing something like this, a voice or a video call. If they're gaming, those sort of scenarios, that makes a really big difference if there's too much of a delay. The other aspect is the competition, right? Why are Chorus doing this? Is it out of the generosity of their hearts that they think that we should all have faster broadband, or is it something to do with the fact that we've got now really at least 2 other options in the market for their customers. One is what comes from our mobile network. So we're talking 2 Degrees, Spark, and Vodafone in terms of being able to offer some really strong broadband, but delivered over the mobile networks. And of course, they've been very much sort of competing on price. So Chorus don't want to bring their prices down. I'm sure they're not keen on a price war, so bumping up the speeds helps. And then the other one, which isn't so much a direct compete with fiber at all, but is going to be impacting some of those providing the mobile connectivity especially to rural locations, is of course Starlink from SpaceX, which is becoming very broadly available in New Zealand now, and pretty much people all over the country have got these connections active. Spoke to Andy Banks over the weekend, who's just outside of Auckland. And he was telling me he's seeing speeds up to 250 megabits a second, coming off that unlimited satellite connection. And I got confirmation last week that my order is ready to go as well. Not that you need that in central Auckland, but you have to test out these technologies and see how they fly. So that's really moving along at a pace now.
Well, of course, and like you say, obviously that's a very fast speed, and not everyone needs that. But of course, that is always going to be the case when hardly anyone is on a network. Then it's going to be really fast, right? And sometimes, even if a network is offering triple speeds, it's not necessarily going to be able to provide that all the time. And it's like Ben says in the chat there. Thanks. It's dependent on the ISP to provide that speed as well. And that's the other thing, because even if Chorus isn't putting up the wholesale price, there's still going to be questions about whether or not the ISPs who are providing the service are going to have to spend in order to actually allow their networks to cope with that extra speed and that extra capacity. So watch this space. You might have triple speeds by Christmas, but it's not all that simple.
Yeah, no, you're right, and the comment that we've got come in just live through this is Ben Simpson, who's come in on LinkedIn, and I know this is predominantly an audio show. We are a podcast, but
Sorry, pop up there.
for those who do choose to catch the live stream, it does give you a chance to to interact with us at times. And Ben Simpson's made the comment that the ISP still has to deliver that speed. The bottleneck is the ISP, as it always has been. I would actually debate that, and it's a little bit unfair on Ben because he's not joining us live. But
Sorry, Ben.
I would say that that what we predominantly see as the big issue is the Wi-Fi around folks' homes, and that's still an ongoing challenge. But we do see certain internet providers are really putting a big focus on that Wi-Fi piece, and in fact, a friend of mine was putting some questions online last week around which internet service provider should I use, and certainly not my place to be picking one internet service provider that Kiwis should be using, but I said probably the most important thing from his perspective as a consumer is keeping it very, very simple and going to an internet provider that's going to provide him with a reasonable Wi-Fi coverage around his home. And without knowing all the facts, mesh Wi-Fi could be part of that mix. You obviously get benefits of wiring up your different access points and so on directly back to your base station, and that's probably outside of the scope of our chat today. But it is one of those important factors. You can have a really fast connection and Wi-Fi that doesn't cover your house or is very, very slow, and you could be paying a lot more for a fast, or a chunk more for a faster connection, and not getting the benefits. So
exactly. And you touched on it earlier as well about the challenge from we're mainly talking at the moment about Vodafone Spark. The 2 degrees are there as well with the fixed wireless plans. They've got into a bit of hot water in the past about potentially mismarketing those and not being clear enough. I mean, fixed line could be accused of the same thing, but I mean, the challenge now is that when you're seeing fewer fixed wireless plans on 4G and 5G with no data caps for a price that I would still say is expensive, but is comparable to fiber broadband, there are fewer reasons for people to not buy into this. I think there's just a problem with how the services are marketed to New Zealanders and people understanding what they're actually buying. And then of course we could go down the whole route of like you were saying before, people in rural areas or places where fiber doesn't reach what's best for them. So it's a constantly evolving, very confusing, regulatory filled jargon area. But broadly speaking, New Zealand is ahead of many other countries. It's just it's kind of lagging in terms of affordability. We're pretty high on the OECD. I believe I did some research recently, and I think New Zealand is the 7th most expensive entry level fiber broadband plan in the OECD, which is not the most expensive, but it could be a lot better. And obviously, we don't have long enough to go into the reasons why it's that expensive, but affordability can definitely be an issue.
Yeah, yep, for sure. And there have been some things done to try and address that into certain segments of the population and giving access to broadband at some very, very low rates. And that's been quite encouraging to see. I saw something. I think there's probably a number of telcos involved in that space. But I saw something from, I think it was Skinny, around their offering. They're probably possibly in conjunction with the Spark Foundation. But good initiatives to make broadband available to those that might not traditionally be able to afford it. I saw recently, I think it was New York, that were legislating that internet providers would have to provide some sort of very low cost plan for those on low incomes, which I thought was a really interesting sort of take. So rather than rather than sort of leave that open for these firms to come up with their own initiatives just to force their hand. I'm not quite sure how that landed. It looked like there was a chunk of pushback. Potentially, you're putting cost onto other users. But it is, I think it's helpful for us here in New Zealand to see what is being done in other markets and what can we learn from and take away from those things, because undoubtedly it's important that we get rid of that digital divide, and we don't have people coming through the education system who just completely lack access, especially times like this when we're locked down, and it's going to be pretty hard to be doing a lot of learning without any online access. Into other topics, Bluetooth contact tracing. This one hasn't had a lot of attention, actually. I was probably a little bit surprised that after all the effort that's gone to build in this Bluetooth contact tracing capability into the NZ COVID Tracer app, that that's had very, very little use. And I mean, I was certainly a bit critical of the app and I guess the sort of ecosystem around it and the communications and stores not knowing about barcodes and so on initially. But look, when I look at how that's just continued to improve over time, I think they've done a very, very good job with the app. But there's a little bit of a void of information around Bluetooth. What's your take on this one, Henry?
Yeah, I agree with you. Compared to some other countries, UK included, New Zealand's integrated the app into people's, just in terms of awareness very well. But also New Zealand uses the Google Apple exposure notification framework. I believe that's what it's called. And that was when Google and Apple put down their boxing gloves and actually did something together for once. And they basically, in your phone, that underlying framework allows for Bluetooth if your phone is compatible. That's a whole other thing. And if you turn it on, I believe there are 2 million people in New Zealand who have turned that on now, or at least 2 million devices. And what happens is your phone, and it was also said that, this is Andrew Chen, who is a very knowledgeable professor. He writes a lot on the issue. He was saying that in order for you to, the Bluetooth notification thing, to realize you've been in close contact with somebody, you have to be within 2 meters of them and for 15 minutes or more. And what happens is your phone will log anonymously all of the different keys, anonymous keys, identifiers from your phone and another phone, and it will log them in your phone and you'll keep them on the device. But the problem here is that in the last outbreak, somebody noticed that the government wasn't calling on this information necessarily when their contact tracing efforts, and that's because the information is stored on the phone. So what happens is that contact tracers need to go to every single person who is COVID positive, and they need to ask them to manually send that data from their phone in the settings to contact tracers. And apparently this is what hasn't been done, and the government claims that, I think it just sounds as though that's a lot of work, and contact tracing has been, by all accounts, fairly successfully done using just the scanning in and people's recollections of where they were. Obviously, there have been a few articles out there, a few journalists asking why not use this, but it does seem to be potentially, although the government hasn't really confirmed this, is that there's a lot more work to get those that data out there, and it's not as automated as it might seem. So that's possibly why they're not using it.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Hopefully that made sense.
Yeah. I mean, I do find it a little bit hard to get my head around some of the explanations that I heard, because it almost came as a bit of a sort of a shock when I think it was Ashley Bloomfield who was asked about it, or it might have been the Prime Minister, and they'll, we'll give them a nudge to do that, just like it had been completely forgotten. It was kind of weird.
It definitely appears like that, but it's been well built into the app. But again, I think it probably just shows us that contact tracing tools are there. They give they're given to us, we should use them, but then it's not necessarily always going to be used, and it's good to have the option, I suppose. And in this case, it's been deemed that contact tracing was quicker potentially, if they didn't have to go through that process.
Yeah, I mean, what I recall from what I heard in the UK is when this had happened, the person that had got it would trigger something, the code or whatever. And that's not a good explanation, but anyway, what would happen is anyone who had been within their that had, I guess, crossed that boundary, which in this case 15 minutes sounds actually like a really long time. And maybe isn't as helpful as it could be with the Delta variant, right? But what was happening there was, people were getting an alert on their phone. The government wouldn't know who they were, but at least that person was getting alert and saying, "Hey, you need to go and isolate for 2 weeks. You need to get a test," and so on. Right. So it seemed like very little effort to actually just get that and trigger it. It would seem to me that they should make that happen.
Yeah, I mean that phenomenon in the UK is now being referred to as the ping-demic, where everyone's phones kept getting pinged. So unfortunately, what that meant in a country that has numbers-wise dealt with COVID a lot worse, people were just uninstalling the app because they didn't want to be pinged. So it depends how your public reacts to these kind of things. And like you say, with Delta, there's also been a suggestion. I think it was Andrew Chen again. He's the source of knowledge on this. He was saying that potentially, like you mentioned, the 15-minute model might have to be reworked for Delta, but then that means that people are going to be pinged a lot more often. If you're just passing someone in the street and it means that Bluetooth says you have to get a test, then you might be overwhelming testing centers. Yeah.
All right. Well, good to delve into that one anyway. And I think there is value in giving these things a little bit of oxygen, and the part of the reason why we've ended up with such a good capable app, and with the attention on it has been because it has been talked about, because Ministry of Health have been releasing the data, so you can see what's going on there. I think it certainly doesn't hurt to keep highlighting these things. Vodafone have announced that they're bringing Wi-Fi calling to their network, and that will vary basically device by device, is my understanding of it from somebody I chatted to. I won't say which telco or when, or even if they were in New Zealand, but to have some interesting discussion around some of the behind the scenes on how features like Wi-Fi calling are now rolled out, and quite tightly controlled by the phone manufacturers as well. So we saw with this announcement that it looks like it'll be Samsung phones that are going to be leading the way. Oppo ones will be coming through. For Apple, it will come through in conjunction with a future update from Apple, and that might leave some people scratching their head because don't iPhones already have a Wi-Fi calling capability? Well, yes, they do, but Apple have to sign off on the whole thing, and then they push an update out to phones, or it'll come probably as part of this next iOS 15 update wave. From the way I was reading the Vodafone press release. So things have changed to a point where there's a lot of control in the hands of certain mobile phone manufacturers, and the way these things fit together, and they need to fit together really well for it to work. The way Wi-Fi calling, or I guess the benefits of Wi-Fi calling, is basically that your call, instead of going over the mobile network, you have that option of it traveling over Wi-Fi. And for me, there'd be two scenarios under where that's really helpful. Maybe you're at a location that has got a good internet connection but doesn't have good mobile access, such as in a rural location, where maybe you've got Starlink and that's your only option because you're way out of the way. Or the other would be if you're traveling overseas, which isn't going to be for too many Kiwis right now, to be fair, whereby you can actually do those calls where normally you'd be charged a lot for roaming, and those calls actually just take place over whatever Wi-Fi networks are available. Is that your take on it, Henry?
Yeah, it was interesting, given that 2 Degrees has had this for a few years now, and if you check their website, they seem to have a much wider range of devices supported. But yeah, Vodafone doing it is good if you're on Vodafone. Obviously, well, maybe not obviously, it doesn't mean that these calls are free. These are the questions that I had from some of my colleagues. It's not like using an over-the-top service like WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger or anything like that. You're still going to be charged for those calls and texts. They're just going over, like you say, a different network. I think it's good. It's just odd that it's a little late, and I believe that Spark doesn't actually offer it at the moment either. But you are right in that iOS 15 will bring the update to New Zealanders on all compatible iPhones. But yeah, you're going to have to check, and I'm not sure if it's something that everyone's looking for or indeed knows exists.
No. Well, there are a lot of these capabilities that are technically possible. One of the ones we've been waiting on is this the eSIMs for Vodafone network, and an ability to, with that eSIM, to or maybe it's 2 Degrees, I don't think have eSIM at all. Vodafone, have they? I can't remember if they've partially got it. Maybe they don't have it at all, but certainly that ability to be able to have an Apple Watch with one number. Really, it's only Spark that have been able to implement that so far. And I remember Jason Paris telling me a reasonable chunk over 18 months ago that by mid-2020 they were going to have that capability, and they don't yet. But it's one of these quite niche things that's quite a bit of effort, time, cost. They've got lots of other projects going on, and they usually eventually get here. And nice to see Vodafone have got this one at least partially ticked off their list. And long may the competition continue, right?
Yeah, I mean, if we're being pessimistic after our talk about fixed wireless, a lot of these telcos in New Zealand have actually prioritized doing voice over LTE, which is obviously when your voice call goes over the 4G network instead of the 2G. So by all accounts, they want you to still make calls on their networks rather than the Wi-Fi you might get from Chorus.
Yes, very much so. Now, jumping back to sort of COVID situation, the other thing that's been announced is around this change to the MIQ system, or managed isolation and quarantine, whereby, well, if we look at the situation that's been around since they've had this online booking system, there's been a lot of people really frustrated because they can't just go in and book a place, because there's only so many places available in the MIQ system. And there wasn't really the smarts there around fairly distributing that. So, we heard of people using bots and sort of automations to try and snaffle those spots. We heard of people having their whole family sort of spread out and clicking on the MIQ booking page sort of 24/7 to try and get bookings. And varying other techniques, people outsourcing it, so somebody would sit there and do it for them. So yeah, lots of challenges, and this was, I guess, because of the nature of the technology that was in place. Australia seemed to take a different approach to the technology, whereby and I think this may have some other challenge. Well, would have had some challenges associated, particularly with where we're placing people who have caught COVID, but because they had some, dedicated accommodation, they were able to basically tell the airlines, look, you can sell this many seats, and we'll make sure that there's accommodation associated. And I'm not quite sure how that happened in terms of families and quite how they would work that out. But that was their approach. They applied the technology to it that way. Now, New Zealand's taking an approach to what they're referring to as a virtual lobby. What's your take? Have you got a picture on how this is actually going to work, Henry?
Yeah, I mean, well, the whole thing in general, just from the human side of it, is so heartbreaking because the people who wanting to be coming home, they're not holiday makers, are they? You have to be resident or a citizen. So it's people who want to come back and probably be with their families. I've got a colleague who had to unfortunately go and attend her mother's funeral abroad, and then coming back was just an absolute nightmare. And the last thing you need when a lot of people are traveling for emotional reasons. But from the technology side of things, again, it's a bit like how New Zealand has a very finite number of MIQ places in the first place. The infrastructure is not necessarily there in terms of being able to house all the people who want to come back under this system. So the virtual lobby was interesting. Just the fact that it's randomized, and I know that it's not ideal the way they had it before, when people were, employing other people to just madly click, and often, immorally charging for the privilege. But yeah, I think Chris Hipkins, I had his quote up here. I believe it's Hipkins. The lobby is a virtual queue that will mean people can be selected from the queue randomly. And he also said that those who miss out would then be informed. And it also meant that people no longer needed to rely on being the fastest to click buttons. So it does kind of solve one issue for sure, which is the gaming of the system. But then New Zealand still has the issue, which isn't a technology issue, I don't think, that there aren't enough spaces for everybody. And I don't know how you solve that with technology.
Yeah, that's a bigger problem that's not going to be solved as quickly. And yeah, I mean, it is heartbreaking. There's a whole lot of different scenarios out there, and the current outbreak has just made things harder. So in fact, that the lobby system and any sort of MIQ booking is pretty much on hold at the moment.
Yeah.
Now into gadgets, I saw news about a Segway branded robotic lawnmower. And I got to say, I've sort of always had an interest in any of these kind of autonomous gadgets. And so the lawnmowers have been of interest, along with the robotic vacuum cleaners, but the technology maybe hasn't moved along quite as fast as what some might like. So it was a little bit of a surprise to hear of Segway getting into this particular field. And I guess in most part it's really just to do with the brand recognition. They bought the Segway, the Segway name, and they can now apply that really to to any product that they launch. And of course Segway now is part of Ninebot, which is a Beijing robotics company, and I think we're going back sort of about 6 years ago since that acquisition. But yeah, you can imagine applying that Segway name. It's still got a broad enough recognition that it becomes helpful. The thing that stood out to me with this announcement, that seems to be the biggest thing that seems to be different, is that we're talking about it being controlled by a sort of traditional navigation system like GPS, rather than the wire, which seems to be the normal way that robotic lawnmowers work. Is you have to sort of lay down under your lawn sort of a wire perimeter to mark the edge. And of course, if that wire gets broken or damaged, that causes some problems So this one looks pretty good. It can handle quite steep angles, 45 degrees, so it's going to probably work on a broad range of properties. Looked like it was around the $2,000 sort of starting price, and they've sort of cleverly scaled the pricing based on how much lawn you've actually got to cut. So how's your lawn looking at the moment, Henry? Is this the gadget you need?
Yeah. I didn't know about the wiring under the lawn thing. I was actually about to chime in and say, yeah, we get around that issue by not actually having a lawn at all. So yeah, not one that I'll be purchasing. I don't actually own. I in a previous job, I reviewed a lot of consumer technology and reviewed a couple of the robot vacuums, which can be pretty fun. But I mean, I presume the same problem applies to the lawnmower, right? Like, doesn't it fill up incredibly quickly? It's a very small unit.
Yeah.
So does it go empty itself?
I don't think it collects the grass. The reading that I took of it is it sort of does these micro cuts. So it's aiming to trim off, and you have got different height settings as a normal lawnmower would. But it talked about it potentially operating as often as daily and just taking a millimeter off. And so if you take a millimeter of grass off, then that can just fall back and it becomes, natural compost across your, across your lawn. It's not really going to be too visible. So, and also it's, I think it's pretty quiet. I can't remember the exact number. Was it 45 dB or something? So not what we're used to. This is an electric lawnmower, just trims a little bit off. And on a regular basis. So quite different, I think, to the way we usually think of lawn mowing, actually. So, I mean, it's certainly at a higher price point that probably not everyone's going to be racing out to get these. But when you look at what it's offering, it uses that GPS. I think there's also a little aerial that you can put up in your ground that's part of it as well, so that allows it to really be super accurate. So yeah, the overall approach from the bits and pieces I've seen on it sounds really good, and I can see others taking this approach going forward. And really, you're talking about a smallish, probably smaller than normal lawnmower with a bit of smartphone tech attached to it, ability for it to return to base and charge itself. So I would imagine in a few years' time, this sort of approach, or whatever the next iteration it is, becomes quite commonplace, becomes actually really, really good and useful. And sub $1,000 type price point, but it could be a few years off yet, and maybe eventually sub $500.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds like the sort of thing that will become more normal. My question to you, I suppose, is you're a Tesla owner, I believe. So would you sooner trust the automation of a robot lawnmower, or are you genuinely waiting until your Tesla can drive you around and you can put your feet up? Because that's the kind of automation that scares me still.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think there's room for all sorts of automations, and I mean, certainly where Tesla are at the moment, those that are interested in where autonomous driving is from, various perspectives, should have a look around at what's on YouTube. I think the Tesla are about to reveal their next beta of the FSD software. They're at this 9.2 beta at the moment, but watching people in the vehicles with that beta, it's starting to get quite encouraging in terms of just how capable it is. It's probably got a long way to go yet. We're starting to see just how hard this stuff is, and I've seen Waymo videos where the Alphabet or Google cars are driving around, and of course they operate quite differently, and they're in a pre-mapped area where they've just got huge amount of metadata up front, and so it's pre-worked out where they can and can't drive. But it's interesting when you see how that tech can fail as well, even when you've gone to that nth degree of mapping it all out, and then there's some road cones or something in an area that it's not expecting, and here we are, I guess, over 10 years down the track on that technology, and it's still struggling. Whereas a few others like Mobileye and Tesla are taking that approach of they're gonna look at what's available through the cameras and drive accordingly. I'm pretty hopeful that we'll see some access to that that particular tech next year at some point, but we'll see how it goes. And the reminder, as always, keep your hands on the steering wheel when you're trying out this technology, and don't fall asleep at the wheel, as I think some in the US have done, or take your eyes off the road. That's still pretty dangerous.
Yeah, I'll stick to the robots, the robot lawnmower, I think.
Now back onto our other topics. So, rumors that we might see some new iPhones very shortly.
Yeah, same time of year, like clockwork. Apple's probably going to announce some iPhones within the next week or so. But as with every year, I suppose the question we should be asking is, what can they actually change? And it's always interesting. I mean, I kind of have to flip between devices for various things. I'm lucky enough to use a few. iPhones are good, and they're very widely used in New Zealand. But what really is Apple going to add to the iPhone 12 at the moment that's going to be worth an upgrade, particularly if you've got the iPhone 12? I think the one thing that is rumored to be getting is the faster refresh rate display. So all iPhones at the moment have a 60 hertz refresh rate, which is perfectly good, to be honest. But some higher end Android phones and some cheaper ones now are spoiling people with 120 hertz refresh rates, or sometimes 90, but basically everything scrolls faster and smoother, app depending. But it's kind of just a bit more of a smooth scrolling experience, which doesn't sound like a feature, but when you actually use it, it's quite nice. So they should be getting that. There's another couple of we talked about satellite communications there. There's a rumor floating around that in this iPhone or the next one, Apple wants to include the possibility to send messages or place phone calls on the satellite network rather than the cellular. I think this sounds more like a safety feature rather than Apple daring to cut out the mobile operators from the middle there, because they obviously do a lot of their business for them. But that's still interesting. But I don't know, from your point of view, as somebody who uses an iPhone, what does your current iPhone not have that Apple could actually add that would mean that you would be encouraging people to go and spend again a year later?
Look, I mean, I think people have to, pick what suits them in terms of, how and when they buy devices and what they buy. For me, I enjoy, across, a range of phones, just how good the cameras have become. I enjoy having a bit more zoom. I think they're Apple have at times not delivered, great great photography, but in recent years, I think they've been very, very strong on that front. Probably the biggest shortfall or disappointing thing from an Apple perspective, if you were looking for something on that front, would be to do with the sort of zoom levels, and they've certainly stepped that up a little bit. That said, on the flip side, you look at Samsung with 100 times, not just Samsung, but Samsung and others who got these sort of ridiculous 100 times zooms that aren't real, and it's a complete joke.
It's always interesting, asking people what they actually want as well from their cameras, because obviously we sometimes test and review these things, and we can get a bit caught up, as you say, and 100 times zoom, but it doesn't look very good. And I ask a lot of my friends what they want, and they're all actually about the wide angle camera. Like you say, some of the zoom in the iPhone cameras isn't that great, and actually the regular iPhone 12 doesn't even have optical zoom. But as soon as my wife, the first time she had a phone with a wide angle camera, she was blown away, and that was what you can get more in. So sometimes people don't actually want to zoom; they want to get further away.
Yeah, well, you definitely have to. I mean, these days you need that wide angle or ultra wide angle. Yeah, I think everyone's certainly got very used to having that capability. You know, I like to have the zoom as well, but the rumor around the satellite connectivity. To me, that seems a little bit far fetched at this stage. But you know, of course, we're always getting surprised by technology, and you know, there are things that sort of come to market. We look at you know, Samsung's folding devices, and you know, to think that you can you know, fold the screen on a phone, and that it's going to you know, actually not bust it, and it's actually going to work. That's you know, that's pretty cool, and you know, we've got that sort of technology you know, today, and you know, there's a few people competing in that space, but largely Samsung. Satellite connectivity. I mean, you raised an interesting point there. How would this play out for Apple versus those that have sold their handsets? If they were able to get to a point where you know, you could just, you know, sign up directly with Apple and get your connectivity that way. But I mean, I think you make a good point. If it does come through, it's likely to be more that kind of emergency type of connectivity. They cut some sort of deal at that level. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting talking about those folding phones as well. Is that you were just holding up the Fold 3 there, were you?
Yeah. Samsung Z Flip, as I see the one that you've reviewed. You've reviewed very recently, and you know, a very nice phone. I mean, it takes me back to the old flip phones from Motorola and so on back in the day, and you know, I'd certainly be going back to the 90s if I remember my first you know, flip phone, and look, that technology worked pretty well for what we needed to do back then, which was make a phone call. And the newest generation of it looks pretty good too. What was sort of the highlight of your experience on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's very impressive. I had it for a couple of weeks. I've had to send it back to Samsung now, but I did review it. And yeah, I think the way that I kind of summed it up was it's a few generations in now, but it feels like it's the first phone that happens to fold rather than it's a folding phone, if you see what I mean. It's kind of everything it does when it's opened, like a flip phone would. It's just like a normal phone, really. The screen is slightly skinnier, but apart from that crease in the middle, which obviously some people might not be able to get over, and you can feel the ridge. But yeah, it just kind of, I mean, apart from the battery life, which actually is incredibly bad, in my opinion, it's got to stuff it into a small thing, but we'll ignore that for now. Yeah, like it kind of just works like a normal phone. And the pricing as well is quite impressive. And it's interesting that Samsung is kind of playing on like the nostalgia of people who remember actual flip phones, and then like a newer, you know, Gen Z generations who might not have had one, and is using it more of just a fashion accessory at a price that's roughly the same as an iPhone.
Yeah.
So yeah, this year being I think $700 cheaper in New Zealand. Yeah, it could be a lot more accessible, and it's kind of something my friend back in England actually went and bought one. It's the first time that, you know, somebody who's not fully you know, just a tech reviewer has actually, in my experience, gone out and spent their money on one. So it's definitely becoming more accessible. But I mean, again, anecdotally, sometimes I show it to people and they say, "Why on earth would I buy that?" So, and the thing that we can't test, of course, is the durability. Like, I can't have that for 2 years and tell you if it's going to break. So we'll find out soon, I suppose.
Yeah, well, I you know, there's a level there to which you have to trust that Samsung have been in this market now with, you know, there's a number of generations of phone. They've got a level of, you know, waterproof now, dustproof. Hey, that's a different kettle of fish. It's not you know, it's not really there. But you know, if you trust their brand, and if you think they stand behind it, you know, you buy it in New Zealand, you're covered by the Consumer Guarantees Act if you buy that as a personal device sort of through those sort of retail channels. So I mean, I wouldn't say, look, if this is the thing that's really exciting you, I wouldn't worry about the reliability now. I would, I would think the price points and the way our consumer rules work, you should be able to go out and buy one of those with a level of confidence, and know that they would stand behind their product. So I don't know. That's my take on it. Now we were going to delve into what's going on with Apple and app stores, Google there as well. We don't have too much time left, but I think it would be good just to give that a little bit of discussion, because we have discussed here on the New Zealand Tech Podcast in the past the pressures that have come on Apple. We've had Epic really sort of pushing and remove. Was it Fortnite that really got removed out of the App Store and the Google Play Store on Android, because they didn't want to see there being a 30% slice of the revenue going back to the software or the platform providers, and that sort of has really been the start of something quite big. We saw last week news through which Apple actually shared around the arrangement that they'd come to with the Fair Trade Commission in Japan, and the press release on September 1 from Apple started with, Apple will let developers of reader apps around the world link to an external website to set up or manage an account beginning early next year, with quotes around reader apps. Now, this is a lot more than what I would class as reader apps. There, I believe they're talking about things like Netflix, audio books, yes, sort of, apps like Kindle for ebooks and so on, Spotify, etc. So there's a lot of things that actually fall under this this category they're calling reader apps. It does feel like there's a little bit of a spin sometimes in these press releases, I suppose.
Just
But and I mean, where we've been, in recent times, is a lot of these apps, there's just no way to actually sign up for them from the app, right? Because they haven't wanted to give that margin away. Do you think Apple's sort of approach talking about these things as fair, sort of saying, well, the cut that they take allows them to run a really good and a safe ecosystem, and it's those funds that are coming back in that allow them to protect consumers?
I mean, as you alluded to, there's so many different angles and arguments for this kind of discussion. So I suppose the thing that Apple got particularly annoyed about with Epic was that I suppose in general it's kind of saying that without our platform you wouldn't have the audience, which in some cases is true. In some cases could be seen as a slightly wrong. I mean, they've kind of created a monopoly or a duopoly if you include Google as well, where, as you were saying, any in-app purchases, Apple can take a 30% cut. Now, so for some and the argument goes both ways. For companies like Epic, if they're turning over millions or sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars, is it fair that Apple gets such a huge cut just because that's how that service or game or whatever has been delivered to a customer? That company might be able to afford it. It gets a bit trickier as well, I think, with the smaller developers. If somebody, okay, Apple or Google, Apple in this case has given them a platform, but then if they're making, I think Apple classes as small developers as anyone who's turning over less than $1 million a year, US dollars. Taking 30% from them is a lot of their revenue, and you can apply for a small business program where you only are charged 15%. But the argument here, like you were saying with these reader apps, is that companies now will be allowed. So I actually have to write this down because it's so confusing. But there's been a recent decision which Apple is allowing developers to contact the customers of people in the apps regarding alternative payment methods outside of the app, which, like you were saying, would forego Apple's charge. But they're not allowed to use data obtained within the app. So to me, that reads as though, oh yeah, that you're allowed to contact, Paul, who signs up for this service. But where did you get his email address from? From within the app? Oh yeah, you can't reach out to him. So I don't know. And in the same press release, Phil Schiller, Apple executive, called the Apple App Store an economic miracle. So as you say, there's like there's a lot of evocative language that Apple uses here about how it's deserved of its trillions, and some would argue that that's true. But it becomes a lot more difficult when you're talking about restricting revenue of people who are using your platform.
Yeah,
I don't think there's one answer really, is there? Yeah.
No, and look at we had the Japanese news, and then I saw around the same time or within a day or two of it last week was South Korea passing a bill that's limiting Apple and Google control over the App Store payments, and basically the rules being there that developers would be able to take and process payments of digital products and services that bypass their 30% cut, so they don't have to pay a commission at all. So it's going to be I think a little bit of probably a rocky road ahead, where each player is trying to get things sort of steered in a direction that suits them. And I think it's definitely going to be quite a different state if we look in probably 12 months' time. It wouldn't be too much of a surprise to find on a reasonably global basis or in numerous countries that we have a scenario where you get that choice whether you pay through Apple or Google, or whether you pay direct. But there's still a huge benefit here to Google and Apple of just the convenience of paying for apps and paying for subscriptions directly. And so that'll be part of it, and I imagine some of them are going to offer discounts by moving off outside of those ecosystems for your payment. But there is a flip side, and I think particularly on the Apple side, and not that they're perfect, but they've done a pretty good job of managing what goes through the App Store, and their focus on privacy and security has been I think pretty helpful to consumers and to business users alike.
That's the thing as well, like because we're just talking about the actual gadgets themselves, like the new iPhones and the Galaxy Flips or whatever. And I think that's the thing that many people don't realize, that the payment they're giving to Apple and Google, Apple in particular in this case, it doesn't actually end when you buy the phone. Like if every payment you make within an app, 30% of that goes to Apple. I just think a lot of these companies are now having to face the wider awareness of these issues, and the fact that they're global companies but are now wanting to be regulated by local authorities is going to be interesting to see where it lands.
Yeah, no, it certainly will be. Anything else that you wanted to add, Henry? I think we're about about to wrap up.
No, good. No, thanks a lot for having me. This is good fun. Obviously, I prefer we were together in person next time, but thanks a lot for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, great to have you, Henry. BusinessDesk.co.nz is where people can see your stories.
That's right. Yeah, we are a paywalled entity, but you can try us for a 10-day free trial and see if you like what you see. We've got a wide range of stuff, but obviously tech's my round.
Yeah. No, I mean, I've been really enjoying, having a subscription to BusinessDesk, and I mean, that's the way things have gone, and I think in many ways it's sort of changing the landscape here in New Zealand, that there's now money from subscriptions able to be really reinvested back into a range of media properties. And I think the depth of content within BusinessDesk has really stepped up with the subscription model. And I was quite impressed when I looked through today, and just looking at all the different writers involved now. It's it's not just one or two people in there. Henry, do you know how big the team is now?
Oh man, you're testing me now. We're definitely under 20 editorially. I think we're about 15, and we have contributors like Peter Griffin, the tech commentator, and others as well. And yeah, it's just it's a good place. It's a good place for me to have worked. Yeah, and everyone is very passionate about delivering content that people will want to read with angles that perhaps other outlets haven't considered, and trying to just deliver original journalism when we can. So that's what we've run head first into that, and yeah, very grateful for everyone subscribing, and yeah, hopefully we can continue along that path.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us on the show. A big thank you to our show partners. We really appreciate their ongoing support. So yeah, big thank you to Gorilla Technology, Vodafone, HP, Datacom, Palo Alto, Spark, Vocus, and Umbrella Connect. So that is us for this week on the New Zealand Tech Podcast. We will look forward to catching you again next week. And if you happen to be catching this on the live video stream, well worth firing up your podcast app and actually subscribing to the NZ Tech Podcast. It's free to subscribe, and that way you'll get looped in with every episode, even if you're not in a position to catch us live. All right, thanks everyone. We'll catch you next time. See ya. Thanks, Henry.